Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Elemental Evan Show. Super excited to have all of you here today and also to be able to hear this amazing guest that we have on the show today. Today we have Dr. Jeff Crippen. He is a chiropractor, nutritionist, coach, and just going to be an all-around health professional. I'm really excited to hear his take on a lot of just topics of health, and I have some really great questions set up for him today. So, Dr. Jeff, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Excellent to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity, so thank you, Evan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure for me to have a different perspective on the show. I know I like to ramble and have my own little episodes of me just, talking the listener's ear off, but it is truly a pleasure, not only for the listener, but for myself to have someone else on the show for, a learning opportunity for me as well. So this is truly a pleasure, and, really a big reason why I started this show is because of a lot of health issues that I've dealt with as a kid. So for those of you who don't know, and Dr. Jeff, if you haven't heard this before, I have dealt with a lot of gastrointestinal issues growing up. That's something that really actually brought me into the health field, and really learning how to navigate and heal myself. Kind of on my own, because of, I don't like to blame the medical field in any way, because I think they're doing the best with the tools they have. But unfortunately, it was not adequate, right? And so I had to move to alternative methods, and that led me here. So it's a blessing in disguise, and I think everyone has a story, and I kind of know a little bit of yours, but I would love to hear how you got into the field you're in.
Yeah, 100% by accident, but that's kind of how life goes. But I'm happy to put a little more color on that story. I remember. I went to get some blood work at some point as a kid, and, you fill out that paperwork and you sit down, they close that little window in front of you and sit in the waiting room, and my mom's with me, and they called me back and they said, "Son, I know what you're going to be when you grow up." And I was like, 6, 7, 8 years old. And like at that point, if I was sure of anything, it was astronaut. Like that's what I was going for at that point in my life. And then I go, "What am I going to be?" And she goes, "You're going to be a doctor." I said, "What? Why?" And she goes, "Because I can't read anything you just wrote on this piece of paper." So that's as close as I thought I was getting to where I am now at that point. But how it started was, a similar story to yourself, and the fact of it was just a chronic health condition that caused a lot of frustration that I wasn't able to find answers for. So in my case, it was headaches. Started when I was 6 years old. Over the counter Tylenol, aspirin, or Motrin, children's at that point, trying, and then you go to your pediatrician, and then try some stronger medications, and then prescription drugs, and eventually wanted to do some imaging of my brain because they got concerned of progressively worsening headaches in a child. So we did that, found a small mass in my brain, talked about brain surgery, decided to go a different option. Turned out it was a benign mass or growth. Did another dozen or so MRIs over the next 10 years, found out it wasn't growing, which was fortunate, obviously to not have a growing mass in my head, but a little disappointing to me as a child, because I was kind of hopeful the doctor would find the cause of the headache, right? I was just grasping for something. Mm-hmm. So at its worst, the headaches, the worst headache I had lasted for 2 years. So every moment, every day, nonstop for a couple years. And so just like, it was hard to get off the couch, hard to walk, hard to go through a day of school. And anyway, it was very, very debilitating, but I just wasn't going to let it stop me, so I kept pushing through. But stopped playing sports, limited hanging out with friends, lived on the couch when I wasn't in school for the better part of a couple of years. So and the reason I guess I got into this is because in the midst of that headache that lasted a couple of years, I just decided I'm not going to go on living like this. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew I wasn't going to go on living like this, right? It's like I needed to find some answer. And, I hoped it was going to be in the medical system. In fact, I searched that for the better part of 5 to 10 years or 7 years, and just kept finding more and more frustration. So eventually I just realized that, probably similar to yourself, I got to figure out some of this myself. And that launched me on a journey 25 years ago that eventually led me to go to college. Actually changed my major in college, majored in Spanish because I wanted something super useful, and did pre-med classes, became a chiropractor, got a degree as a certified traditional naturopath, and I've been practicing for about 12 years now, working with other patients, helping them, kind of with their chronic debilitating conditions. And either the patients kind of fall into one or two groups. One is they've been in the medical system, maybe like yourself, and they couldn't find help and they're frustrated and they want another option. And the second group is, those who just don't even want to go to the medical system. They want to look at the underlying cause. They want to treat what's really going on, and they want an approach that's not drugs and surgery. What can we do naturally or more holistically to improve my health? So it's been my pleasure to, build a practice around that, and been working with patients with that for the last 10 plus years.
Yeah. Honestly, wow. I think about what I went through as a kid, and it's like there was struggle, you know what I mean? But nothing like a 2-year long headache that you have to deal with for like your entire for you don't even know how long. So that is really crazy. I can only imagine what that was like. And I do think, though, I'm a big believer in like your struggle becomes your story, and it's one of those things where it's like you just keep pushing and find a way, right? It's about never quitting, and I think that's what ultimately brought both you and I here is that unwillingness to accept the situation we're dealt, basically, and just finding a way to heal ourselves. And so on that note, I typically do not get a ton of headaches, and I feel that most of my headaches are simply, literally the most textbook, like dehydration. You know what I mean? Like just need to get a little bit more hydration and all good. But I know a ton of people who deal with regular headaches, migraines, like just really, really, like you said, like debilitating migraines and headaches. So I would love to have your professional opinion and advice on what are some of just the causes of these headaches and migraines, as well as what are like some of the simple things that we could just be doing on the daily to avoid these, even if it is just the hydration. Like that usually works for me, and I hate to throw it out there because I think some people are like, dude, water's not going to cure me, but yeah.
So I think, as you were saying that, I thought of the quote, "Persistence alone is omnipotent." Right? I don't know. That quote came to me as you were talking about your story and just like sticking to it. And it's something, I agree with you. I'd consider what I went through now a blessing. If somebody maybe would have told me that when I was going through it, I don't know if I would have felt the same way. Because it's just, when you're kind of in that moment, it's just survival. It's just like, survive and advance and just try to take it one step at a time, to use a cliche, but it's like you're just trying to survive that one moment. And half the time I was just trying to block out the pain, push it off as much as I can to just try to go forward. But, but I can be, so I can understand, people listening to this are going through something. You say, be grateful for what, because I would have been with you going through that. But that being said, it was through that struggle that helped me find purpose and passion. So anyway, super, super grateful for it now. But that was a decades long process to kind of tap into that. So going to your question on headaches, and I think headaches are a really interesting symptom because you mentioned, you get them sometimes, and it could be dehydration. And we could have a woman listening to this podcast, and she could get some around her cycle, and that could be a different cause, right? A hormonal cause. We could have a young high school athlete, maybe a football player or a male or female soccer player, get one after a game, and it could be, a symptom of a concussion, right? You could have a college student get one early on a Sunday morning or late on a Saturday night from too much alcohol or something else that evening, right? So there's, the interesting thing about headaches is there's not one single cause, right? And that kind of gets in medicine. The solution, if you're dehydrated or I have a headache or somebody's hungover or post concussion, they might deal with it a little differently, or somebody with a hormonal headache. Generally, the solution is going to be some kind of pain reliever, some variation of take two and call me in the morning, suck it up, push through, and eventually, if it gets bad enough, stronger drugs, right? But your question's a good one, because what's causing the headaches isn't necessarily for any of those people an aspirin or a Tylenol deficiency, right? So I think the first way to answer your question is, what do you do about a headache? Is you got to figure out what's going on, right? And I think that is, that's so key. So that's the first step I would look at. And in terms of, I kind of take a functional or holistic nutritional view, or functional and holistic view in respect to nutrition. So what does that mean? It means when somebody comes in, we'll do nutritional assessments or energetic assessments of different organs of their body. And what I typically find for headaches is it has to do with underlying stress on one of four main organs. So one would happen to be the brain. So eventually I go to chiropractic. I'm going to take a detour from that story to tell you this. So I'm in chiropractic school, and we take like a neurological diagnosis class where they're teaching us about, different neurological diseases. And then we have a lecture on headaches, or 2 lectures or whatever it was. And to hear them talk about headaches, it's just like none of them described anything I ever felt in my life. So it just feels like, I think there's like a textbook idea of what a headache, and then there's the practical application of it. But, a lot of times from a medical standpoint, they're looking at the vascular nature of a headache. So they're looking at something to do with blood flow. There's conflicting, just to show how confused the area is, there's conflicting ideas whether it's too much blood flow or not enough blood flow, both of which they talk about causing headaches. So, just to give you an idea, it's generally an unknown, kind of what it is medically. So, but from a functional, nutritional perspective, what I often find is stress hitting the body in one of 4 areas. So I mentioned brain being one. Second one is heart, cardiovascular in general. Third is thyroid, and fourth is adrenals. And then it's a matter of, looking at which one of those causes which organ's weak, see if you can find out what weakened that organ, what was the stressor that kind of hit that tipping point, and then building it back up piece by piece. And that's a holistic approach to solving the problem. And then you can even go one step back and kind of address the stressor. So what was the stressor? What was the incident? What was going on in the person's life behind it? Now, all of that to say, that's all what's sitting behind it. The other option is a pain reliever from medicine, or even, an herbal or a nutritional thing to alleviate the pain from maybe a holistic-minded doctor. But there's levels behind it of what organs generating the pain, what's that dysfunction a sign of, and then even a step behind that, what was that domino that caused that dysfunction? So that's kind of the mental framework I would kind of work through that with, and I'm happy to go deeper into any of those that are helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that was very beneficial. I appreciate that breakdown. I find it interesting as well that you mentioned the adrenals and the thyroid.
Yeah,
and that really makes sense to me. I think that could actually be a major issue for most people, just because obviously we are taxing our adrenals so heavily with stimulants like caffeine, really just spiking that cortisol, and also just like you said, living in a stress state, that's also going to spike that cortisol. And not to say it's going to be the same issue for everyone. It's not everyone's having this issue with their adrenals, but I do think that's probably a major one. And in terms of helping out these organs, would you recommend, for example, well, obviously, I think a cleaner diet is always obviously a good option, but what about some kind of adaptogenic herbs, maybe something that can really, I'm thinking like ashwagandha, for example, off the top of my head, for helping out with these adrenals. Would that be a good idea, would you say?
Sure. So you're definitely on the right track there, and I think that's a really great question, because there's a lot of herbal support that's fantastic for the adrenals. Ashwagandha would be at or near the top of that list. You're absolutely right. Things like licorice, romania, rhodiola, schisandra, Korean ginseng. That's kind of I'm trying to go through in Eleuthero, those are kind of the main adrenal type herbs. But if we take it to answer that question, but if we take a step back on that question, because I think it's a good one, a really good one. So what's the stress doing to the body? So imagine you got a car and you drive to the grocery store and back, right? Then imagine you got a car and you drive 100 miles an hour nonstop for 10 hours, right? How much more stress is on the car driving nonstop for 10 hours versus going to the grocery store and back? And I think that's the equivalent of what's happening with stress in our body. So then I think the next question is, what nutrients are stress using? So in that example, when we drive 10 hours in the car going 100 miles an hour, what are we burning up? We're burning up the gas. Maybe need some more coolant, maybe need to change the oil a little more often, right? I mean, you think through like what's happening with a car. So in the body, what's going on? So some of the main nutritional factors that support healthy adrenals are B vitamins. And I'm not talking so much about kind of supplement or synthetic kind of B vitamins, but just whole food rich sources of B vitamins. So examples of this could be nutritional yeast, could be beet, could be sweet potato, could be liver. But B vitamins are just one example of, that's a nutrient that's just burned up by four main things. One is, to go to your question on diet, eating sugar just burns up B vitamins because it's used it to break down glucose into energy. So eat a lot of sugar, you're going to be short on B vitamins. Excessive exercise. So these are like ultra marathoners, people who are doing long distance biking, but there's something called exercise-induced cardiomyopathy, which is like an enlargement of the heart that I think is a deficiency of the B vitamins, just because you burned them all up running 40 miles or 50 miles or biking 200 miles or whatever it is. So we talked about sugar, we talked about too much exercise. Alcohol will burn up B vitamins. Use some B vitamins as cofactors in the detoxification of alcohol. And the fourth thing is stress. So stress will burn up B vitamins just like that. So I think that's one example of something that's super useful. The other thing somebody might burn up a lot in is vitamin C. Now, the issue is if you look on most supplements, not all, but most supplements, they'll define vitamin C as ascorbic acid, right? Which is basically an antioxidant, and they'll talk about that, and it has 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams or 2,000, whatever it has of ascorbic acid in it. The only problem is that's actually not what vitamin C is. It is according to the government, but if you find vitamin C in nature, there's over 1,000 different cofactors that actually make that vitamin C. So if you find vitamin C in an orange or in broccoli, there's 1,000 different nutrients that all make it work. And the vitamin C is, maybe 2% of that, maybe 5% of that. So the other 95+% is not the ascorbic acid. So what is the ascorbic acid? It is an antioxidant. But what that is nature's way of protecting the rest of the functional vitamin C complex. So
Gotcha.
The example I give for ascorbic acid is ascorbic acid's like wrapping paper. And you get that for a birthday gift. Well, most people don't necessarily want wrapping paper as a birthday gift. They typically like, especially kids, what's inside the wrapping paper. And that's what I think the ascorbic acid is. Ascorbic acid is the wrapping paper that's protecting the present inside. So what is some of the present inside? One key nutrient in it is something called rutin, R-U-T-I-N. And it's kind of, it's a nutrient you find very high in buckwheat. So buckwheat is a gluten-free grain. It's also found in apples. It's also found in onions in lesser qualities. But rutin is incredible support for the adrenal glands and incredible support for the circulatory system as well. In fact, to share something with you and your audience, Harvard did a study looking for the best clot-busting molecules. And I think they looked at 5,000 different molecules. And what they found is the single best clot-busting molecule that existed on the planet was rutin, because it worked on arterial arterial clots, those in the arteries, as well as those in the veins. And they wrote it up in the Harvard magazine.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. So that is, and the richest food source of that is buckwheat. So, and if you're looking for a supplement, then you really want to look for a supplement that has buckwheat in it, right? Because that'll be a food source. And other, so that would be a couple examples of things that I would look for in terms of what does stress burn up in the body. right? So we talked about B vitamins, they kind of get burned up in whole food source of that. Talked about vitamin C that gets burned up in whole food or food-based source of that. The other thing that kind of gets burned up around stress that could be connected to the headaches are minerals, specifically what's called alkaline ash minerals. So there's certain minerals that are more acidic, certain that are more alkaline, going back to chemistry days for high school for many of us. And but alkaline minerals, things like calcium, magnesium, manganese, potassium. But just a note on those minerals, again, those are best. I really like a food concentrate of minerals, because I like to think minerals of the body, they're like instruments in an orchestra, in the sense of, if you have an orchestra and you just take a bunch of calcium or a bunch of potassium, well, it's like doing 50 times as many tubas in the middle of an orchestra, right? It's gonna, tubas are good, but it's gonna throw off the whole balance and change the sound of anything. And the minerals are similar to each other, and that's what the periodic table is. The ones, each column has similarities to the other ones, and you'll notice some of these minerals, they're close to each other in the periodic table, which means the body can use one to the other. So that being said, it's important to get minerals kind of in a balanced form, so you don't end up with an orchestra with way too many tubas, right? So those are some examples of things that get burned up. So we have whole food B vitamins, whole food vitamin C, as well as some of those alkaline ash or relaxing minerals. Could be super helpful in situations like that.
Yeah, that's an incredible answer. Yeah, I love everything you were saying there, especially on the rutin. That was incredible. I had no idea about that, and it's and also it's the amount of it in buckwheat. Like, I had no idea that was even a thing. I know for vitamin C, I usually will turn to like camu berry. That's usually one of the main forms of vitamin C that I'll usually turn to. What's your take on camu berry?
Yeah, so I think that can be a good source for sure. One of the richest sources animal-wise is actually the adrenal gland.
Wow,
this is kind of
I love that.
Yeah, so this is like for those who aren't vegetarian on the podcast and things like that. But what does that tell us? What does that tell us is that the adrenal glands live on vitamin C, right? And the question that always interested me is, how did you look at like kind of ancestral diets, and like the Maasai in Africa ate very different than the Japanese near Okinawa, and I've heard you talk about blue zones on some of your podcasts before, and you kind of look at the Mediterranean diet. But in this case, let's look at the Inuit up in Alaska. Where the heck are they getting vitamin C from, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we can make an idea of where they're getting vitamin D from, right? If they're not getting it from the sun, because there's not a lot of it up there, right? We can understand they're getting it from liver, cod liver, right, being a source. And you can understand something, but where are they getting vitamin C from? Because nuts or berries, vegetables are not a big part of that diet, right? So the answer is the adrenal glands. So it's actually like a very prized like organ meat. And if you look at, a lot of times if you find like animals when they go hunting, they'll eat the organ meat first and leave the muscle meat last, recognizing the nutrient quality of that. So I think camu can be a good source. They talk about a few different ones, but I kind of like a mix, and then certainly having some adrenal, having some buckwheat, I think are just two fantastic sources. And then the key you're looking at is how much ascorbic acid do they put in there? Because most companies have to put in some, at least for a label claim, just to guarantee after 2 years it's going to have a certain amount in there. But what you want is the ratio of food source to be, very, very high relative to the quantity that's synthetic on the label. So anyway, those are a couple of the best sources. And I don't know about the rutin and camu. So I don't know whether that has that in it. As far as I know, buckwheat is the best source. Like I said, apple and onion, a couple other sources in there. So to get that whole vitamin C complex, I'd want to make sure there's something that's really high in kind of that rutin in there for that adrenal benefit, but also that circulatory support, strengthening the arteries, clot prevention kind of effect that's in there.
Absolutely. You're expanding my vitamin C knowledge at this moment, and realizing I need to step my game up on it. So I really enjoy that. And now, since we're already on this topic of food as medicine, and I love the tie-in that you did with adrenal glands. That was incredible. What, in your opinion, what would be some of, and I think we're both on the same page in saying that some of the best food is obviously the closest food to nature, right? So what would be some of this food that's so close to nature that you would recommend as being some of the foods that we all need to be eating on a regular basis, not just for headaches, but for overall health?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually worked for a while on an article. I was trying to simplify down some of the most important practices. If somebody can only do a certain number of things each day, what would they be? Like a list of, I think I've got to like a dirty dozen or 16 of like, what would be those things? And some of it was obviously not food-based. It would be like, talk to a friend or practice gratitude, and some of the, spirit, mind, body pieces that you mentioned on recent episodes. But in terms, if we look specifically at food, I think a couple things I'd look at would be apple cider vinegar. 1 to 2 tablespoons a day. We're getting some good, apple cider vinegar is shown to help with weight loss. It's very good for overall joint mobility, arthritis, even like a frozen shoulder. So it's really good for balancing the pH of the body. And if you get apple cider vinegar with the mother in it, it's got some good bacteria in it, so you naturally get a probiotic. So another group would be fermented foods. Something with some good bacteria in it. So some of my favorite ones are sauerkraut. If you really got a strong stomach or like the taste, kimchi could be a good one. Yogurt, sometimes coconut milk yogurt, or a good quality yogurt that's not pasteurized, kind of hormone free and not full of sugar. This kind of would be good things to look at there. But fermented foods, fermented. So yeah, we got fermented foods. We got apple cider vinegar. Next, we'll talk about sea salt. So people may hear, well, salt's good, but it could raise your blood pressure. And I find that not true in the correct amount. So I think most people would do well between 1 and 2 teaspoons of salt per day. And I'm talking about sea salt, not sodium chloride, table salt. That stuff, throw in the garbage, absolutely poison. But if you get a whole food,
Thank you.
a whole, yeah. But if you get a whole, like a whole food, basically what sea salt is, which is dehydrated ocean, right? That's how they make it. Some of those you can find 40, 50, 60, 70 different minerals in it. And what you'll find is the body, number 1 mineral in the body is sodium. Number 1 mineral in the ocean is sodium. Number 2 in the ocean is chloride. Number 2 in the body is chloride. And then you have calcium and potassium. And you look at the mineral composition of the body, it's very similar to the ocean. So it's almost like a fractal of each other, if that idea kind of communicates. But so sea salt, 1 to 2 teaspoons a day. And the more you sweat, probably the more you need, a natural electrolyte. Now, one of the things for your listeners, since we're talking about the adrenals, is one of the signs of adrenal fatigue is craving salty foods. So if you're craving salty foods, or you're drawn to salty foods, chips, popcorn, like to put a ton of salt on your food, that's a sign of adrenal fatigue. Why? And the answer is your adrenals respond to a hormone called aldosterone and help the body hold on to sodium. So if the adrenals are weak, it won't produce as much aldosterone, and you'll pee out. You'll urinate out or lose through the urine a lot of sea salt. Or you lose a lot of salt, a lot of sodium. So somebody having salt cravings or craving salty foods is a sign of adrenal fatigue. So that's good. And then I'm just thinking a little bit of gut health for you, since that's up there. So a couple more on that is I love bone broth, about a cup a day, for a whole bunch of different reasons, but certainly a great source of collagen. You make it homemade, you get some good calcium, you got a good bit of protein as you're going in there as well. You can make it with some apple cider vinegar, so you get a little bit of that in there. You put a little turmeric or ginger, so you get some anti-inflammatory benefits in there. If anyone's looking for a recipe, I've got one on my Instagram that you can find there, along with a bunch of the benefits of that. It's also a rich source of L-glutamine, which can be great for gut repair and kind of leaky gut. So that would be one. And then I'll talk about turmeric and ginger kind of together, just incorporating some of that in your diet. Both of them are potent anti-inflammatories, and ginger specifically is one of the single best foods for gut health, probably along with fermented foods and bone broth. But it's widely antimicrobial, somewhat antiparasitic, antifungal, antibacterial. So it's really good for nausea as well. So that would be phenomenal. Turmeric, has incredible benefits, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer. I can go on and on for a while, but I'll give you one more. There was which would be beets and beet leaves, which are Swiss chard, which is the number one food for gallbladder health. I was talking to a doc once, and he was telling the story of a general surgeon who, it's the number one food I probably use for gallbladder health, beets and beet leaves. So he was talking to a general surgeon. He started advising all this. So this general surgeon was doing like 3 to 4 gallbladder surgeries a week, and he started adding. The patients would come in if they weren't an emergency. He'd say take a couple bottles of this beet leaf. Swiss chard is very similar to beet leaf, so they both have betaine, which is the key ingredient you need in beets and beet leaves. But he'd have them do that, and he went from doing 3 to 4 gallbladder surgeries a week. I think he did 0 in 2 years. So I'm not saying this is guaranteed to prevent that. I saw somewhere else about 85% of all gallbladder surgeries can be prevented with beet and beet leaves. So it's really good. What it does is naturally thin the bile. So bile is made by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and your gallbladder kind of releases it when you eat a fatty meal to help digest fats, helps lubricate the bowel, helps with a whole bunch of different things. But what happens is when that bile can get sludgy, get congested, it gets thick, and that's when stones are more likely to develop. So something that naturally thins the bile can be incredibly important for that, and that's beets and beet leaves. I could probably keep going with some other ones, but I think those are I'm happy to keep going, or I'm happy to turn it back over to you, but I think those are some really important ones there.
Yeah, holy cow. I love all of that. I mean, I'm literally in like a class lecture at the moment. I'm loving this. So, first off, I wanted to retouch a few points. I love that you spoke about salt, which I think people really underestimate the power of high quality salt. Like you said, not the fabricated salt that essentially just has 2 ingredients, right? Like we're looking for this sea salt that contains, like you said, all of these minerals, which our body is like basically the ocean, like I love how you made that connection there. And I think a lot of people fail to remember that salt was a massively valuable product back in the day, during the Roman times, right? Like I believe I heard that the term salary is derived from the term salt.
The root word, S-A-L. Yep, you're exactly right.
Yeah, and so it just goes to show how valuable it truly is, and it's something to not be overlooked right now. I also love the fact how you tie that in terms of it being used up. Just everything on that topic was excellent, and I also
thank you.
I wanted to speak a little bit about the gallbladder just very briefly, and I love that you went into that whole talk, because my grandma actually, like a year ago, had her gallbladder removed. She was going through intense pain and had to have it removed, and this would have been amazing to know. This would have been great knowledge. After that, I did a liver / gallbladder cleanse, and I mean, sorry, too much information here, but definitely passed some gallbladder stones or some gallstones. It's absolutely wild. I couldn't believe I had them. I just figured I was too young, but so beets are going to be high on my list of trying to get them in, and like I said, the beet leaves as well, or the Swiss chard. So sincerely, thank you so much for diving in on that. I think you and I could have a conversation for hours on just that topic. But to get into a new kind of avenue, there is one topic I wanted to speak on a little bit with you, and that was just this placebo effect. Now, I've heard that you've spoken about this and kind of what it can teach us, but I would love to hear your opinion on this and kind of your take on it, because I did an episode quite a while back now on the placebo and the nocebo, and it's fascinating to me. So I would just love to hear your take. Take the floor and take it wherever you want.
Yeah, sure. Well, great. This will be fun. So the placebo, just to define the term, is basically the idea that when you're doing any kind of research, or specifically a drug trial in most cases, they give one group of participants the drug, and they give the other group of participants what's commonly called a sugar pill or a placebo, which supposedly has no effect. But they do that so the groups don't know who's getting the real drug and who's getting the fake drug, the placebo. And the reason they do that is they want to make sure that every drug that's approved is more effective than a placebo. So they want to minimize the placebo effect, because they don't want a drug being approved just because someone thinks it's working. They want to know it's actually working. So, and this is needed because you might think, well, who actually gets better just taking a sugar pill? And why they would give a sugar pill is a whole other story. And they certainly add all kinds of stuff into most placebos anyway, so it's not purely a sugar pill. But why would people get better just taking something that has nothing in it or no active ingredients? But it's actually super common. 30% of the people will get better just taking a placebo. So in medical terminology, in medical research, they want to minimize that as much as possible. But I think that opens an opportunity for us holistically, not to trick people into giving them sugar pills, but to look at the fact of, bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy. The number one cause of personal bankruptcy is medical bills. Right? I mean, this is a huge issue. So if we have something that literally costs nothing, that 30% of the people get better taking, I think that's worth looking into. And I'll expand on that a little bit more. So then there's a study. There's a guy named Mosley with the orthopedic surgeon. He was down in Houston. He was the orthopedic surgeon for the NBA team in Houston, the Rockets, the WNBA team there, and he was a surgeon on one of the Olympic teams. So this guy's like a big deal in orthopedics and orthopedic surgery. And he did a study. He was trying to figure out what the best surgery was for osteoarthritis or arthritis of the knee. So one surgery is they flush out the joint, clean out the irritants, to kind of calm it down. So it's a flushing of the joint. Another one's a shaving. So they go in and shave down the cartilage, make it smooth again. So that's a shaving. And he wanted to know what was better, the flushing or the shaving. Well, they said in order to do the study, you need a placebo group. He said, well, how do you do a placebo group for surgery? How do you fake a surgery, right? Or how do you do a sham surgery? So, but what they ended up coming up with, they did 3 groups, including a placebo group. And what they did is the doctors didn't know what they were doing, so they scrubbed in and got ready. The patients didn't know, obviously, what they were doing. They sedated the patients, and just before they made the first incision, they gave the surgeon a card, and it said, basically flushing, shaving, or placebo. And they did whatever that was. So if it was a placebo, they made a couple incisions. They moved around. They stayed in the operating room for 30 to 40 minutes like they would with either surgery, talked like they were doing a surgery, but they didn't actually do anything in the joint. But they still made the incisions, closed the patient back up, and that was it. So then they wanted to see which one had the best improvement. Was it the flushing? Was it the shaving? Or was it the placebo? And you know what they found? They all improve the same. So Jeez. Mosley, he's got this great quote. He says, so he goes, I had to look in the mirror. I had to realize that all my skill as a surgeon was totally useless to the patients. So the ones who got no surgery improved just as much as ones who got surgery from one of the top surgeons, in his field. So I think what that tells us is, health is not physical. Right, if we're looking to understand our health purely by looking at the physical, I think we can't, right? And one of the chapters of the book I called the quantum principle, which I said the power of nothing, which is the power of no hyphen thing, or basically the power of energy, right? And what makes me think of is there's a quote by Einstein. So Einstein, obviously the scientific genius, was involved early in quantum physics along with some others. And what he said at one point was the sole governing agent of the particle is the field, or the field is the sole governing agent of the particle. So what was he saying on that? He said you can't understand the movement of a single particle like an atom or like an electron, really. You can't understand that without understanding the energetic field that surrounds it. And I think our body, and I know our body, my experience is our body is exactly the same way. And I think that placebo effect is one example of that. That's actually what's more important than the surgery is our beliefs and our mindsets and our hopes and our dreams connected to health. And there was another researcher, his name was McClare. He was at Oxford University. And he found that energetic stimuli are 100 times more powerful and affecting the cells as things like physical stimuli, like neurotransmitters or nutrients. So energy is 100 times more powerful. And I bet you and a lot of your listeners have experienced this, because how many of you guys have been around certain people and felt more energized and great and were having fun and felt fantastic? And how many were around other people and felt tired and down, and you could feel it immediately when you walked in the room? Like you open a door to that party or that business event, or you just saw that person across the room and your mood level just goes, so what is that? It ain't physical, right? Because it doesn't happen that quick. So I think that's an example of it. I think it's a super, one, it's a super powerful principle. Two is 30%, we can harness that. How can we harness that so 30% of people get better when something that literally costs nothing? And three is, how can we use that like the placebo effect is like a window into a bit of truth, and how can we incorporate that into like our daily life and our daily healthcare decisions and how we look at things like disease and health. And I think it has implications for all of those things and probably more.
Yeah. That was incredible, an incredible explanation of it. And I love that example that you gave with the knee surgery. I definitely, I think a lot of times we always look for that external source to heal, and really all that knowledge and ability to heal is within our cells. It is here. Like our body has this innate knowledge of healing itself, like it has to survive. And I think when we learn to finally tap into that, there's a lot of potential. And I think it's shown in, doctors say that truly the number one determinant of how long someone is going to live is how long they think they're going to live. If you ask someone, how long do you think you're going to live? And they say a certain age, that's usually a lot closer than any other form of measurement. And, there's countless examples of that where you can see it time and time again, where just the manner in which a person thinks, or these deep held beliefs that might have been instilled in them as a child, they really do show up later on in life. And so it's not just we don't just become what we eat, but it's also it's what we consume in all forms, right? From food to knowledge to music to TV, everything. It's all playing its own role. And I love that you tied in the placebo in that way. So thank you for that. And I also noticed you mentioned a chapter in your book, which we definitely need to talk about. Can you speak a little bit about its timeless youth, right? And I know you kind of have the title written a little differently. So please share, what is this book about? Kind of what, what's the goal of you writing this book, and what do you want the reader to really obtain from it?
Well, awesome. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, and it's Timeless Youth, Y-O-U, with a little T-H. So it's a play on the word you. And basically, it's going after that point you just made, which I think is incredibly important and worthwhile. And thank you for saying it, which is like the number one truth in your health is you. The most powerful force in your health is you. And nobody knows more about your health, no doctor anywhere, than you. Right? Now, doctors, including me, including anyone, should be great advisors to you. They should be people that should help you. Any coach, holistic health coach, trainer, Reiki practitioner, massage therapist, they work for you. And ultimately, you're in charge of your health, and you have the right to fire any doctor you want at any time, right? Because, and I say that to say, it's really, I've seen too many people walk into doctors' offices, and the doctor uses some big Latin words, and they don't understand what the heck said, and then they end up walking out on 3 or 6 or 10 different medications. And if you ask them what's going on, they don't really understand, which is a shame, in a sense of, not to say the doctors did anything wrong, but I certainly think if they communicate, it would be great if the person they talked to understood what they were saying. So you ought to, Einstein had another quote. He said, anything complex should be able to explain in even the most simple of terms. Like the highest level of understanding. It was like the highest level of understanding is when you can explain something simply. And I think we should have that. Yeah, I think we should all strive to have that with our doctors and understand what they're saying about your health and understand if that makes sense to you. But to go back to your question, like anything that works, it works because it helps you. right? Even those foods I was talking about, the ginger or the garlic or the apple cider vinegar or the bone broth, all it's doing is giving you and your body the raw materials it needs to do what it knows to do. Right? Your body is capable of making just about any pharmaceutical drug. It can heal better than any surgeon. Right? Even surgery, when it's done well, all the healing's still happening by you. Right? They can cut and they can take stuff out, but it's the body's own amazing ability to heal that's unlocking all of that. So that's it's a little side detour there. But the book is called Timeless Youth, Youth. And I wrote this book. Sometimes I wonder why I wrote the book. I had a great idea. The reason I wrote the book is because I wanted to reach more people than I could reach in my clinic. And the reason I wrote that book is because I wanted a resource to be able to give to me when I was 6 years old, or my parents as we were driving around doctor to doctor searching for answer. I wanted to be able to give one to, have some information for you to give to your grandma. Right, to have this I wish I would have known this information sooner. I have patients, with family members around the country and around the world, and it's like I want to be able to give them something where even I can expand the reach and pass on some of what I found super helpful with myself and my patients, and put a little truth bomb out into the universe and let it go as far as it can go. And I just was frustrated by people saying, I went to my doctor and they told me everything's fine, but they're feeling tired and they're feeling fatigued and they think they have an autoimmune disease and they don't know what's going on, but the doctor looked at the blood work and said they're fine. Well, then they went back and the doctor said, well, I can't find anything wrong with you, and they can't understand why they have all these pains, so they're given an antidepressant. Right? Or they have an autoimmune disease and the doctor says, here's an immunosuppressant, take this for the rest of your life. Oh, by the way, the side effect is cancer. Right? Or you just go through those different lists of all the things, and there is a better option, and there's a lot more to that. And there's some lessons that I've learned, that placebo effect we dived into a little bit, and there's more on that kind of deeper in the book, but there's 5 key principles that I think have to be applied. And also, I think if you understand the principles, another quote, if you only know the methods, you're forever tied to those methods. Like if you only learn the tips and tricks, you're forever looking for the next tip and trick and not understanding why they work. But if you understand the principles that behind those methods, you're free to create with them. And I really think the single most important thing someone can do is actually understand what health is and what creates it. Because if you do that, the next time you look at a food or try to understand what a diet is, or try to look and make these choices or try to help friends, you can do it from a point of you got the whole operating system right. And that was the intention of the book, to give someone, they could give some information they can tap into, they can understand, they can share with their friends, or they can share with their church groups, or they can share with family members that can help them unlock the body's own ability to heal and help them understand how much of health you can do on your own that costs nothing. Right? And I think there's incredible value in just understanding that.
Yeah. Dr. Jeff, I love that. And that really deeply resonates with me, because this podcast in a lot of ways is my kind of give back to my younger self, and kind of that thing that it's like, if I had this tool back then, things would have been very differently. But of course, like we said earlier on, it's this path that led us to where we're at, and so now we can come from this place of service and provide, like this book, Timeless Youth, right? And really be able to give back to the community and the community at large, in terms of having a book. You're able to reach so many more people than you normally would be able to. So thank you for diving in on that. And Dr. Jeff, honestly, we're coming to an end here, but man, like I said, I think you and I have a lot more conversation to have. I would love to have you back on. That's something we could definitely discuss in the future. And before we do find our way to the conclusion, I would love for you to just provide places where people can connect with you, can reach out to you, can find you. Just whatever resources you might have where they can find find your book, Timeless Youth, and take the floor, share all of that good stuff. Of course, I'll link it in the show notes, and take the floor.
Well, awesome. I enjoyed the conversation immensely, Evan. I sincerely hope it was incredibly useful and valuable to your listeners, and I'd be happy to continue that conversation again, or expanded, extended, and deep dive into some of these awesome areas we touched on, and plenty more to do. So it'd be my pleasure to do that. So best way to probably connect to me is probably over Instagram. You can find me, Jeff Crippen, JeffCrippen. You can find me on Instagram. I've got some stuff linked there. I mentioned that bone broth recipe. We've talked about some of those, powerful foods, and there's more there. So you can connect with us on Instagram. And if you have any questions, it's probably the best way to reach me or kind of continue the conversation. And for the book, Timeless Youth, you can get it pretty much anywhere books are sold. It's certainly on Amazon. You can find it through the website timelessyouthbook.com, but any bookstore, U.S. and abroad, can order it and have a copy in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, kind of all those main ones. You can find it there, and I'd love you to pick up a copy and share it with some friends if you found this interview useful. That would mean a lot and kind of help me continue my mission to share that positivity and truth about health throughout the universe. So I'd be incredibly grateful to you guys for doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Dr. Jeff, I really deeply from the bottom of my heart appreciate you coming on this show. And I found the conversation super valuable. So hopefully, and I already know that the listeners will find it valuable, but if at the least it was a great opportunity for me. I love having guests on because it literally is. It's just a learning opportunity aside from me being able to provide this to the listener. But Dr. Jeff, truly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show. Like I said, we'll probably be having you back on. And for all the listeners out there, please go find Dr. Jeff on Instagram. I'm definitely going to check out the bone broth recipe, so I advise you to do so as well. I'll try to I don't know if I can link a post in there, but I will link his Instagram. So you can go ahead and find it. And you already know the motto of the show. It's do everything with good intentions and connect to your elements. Dr. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you, Evan.